Ladies and gentlemen, just let me get through a bit of setup before going into our practical arguments for today. So firstly, how could we model this topic? Right, noting that we have quite significant amounts of fiat, seeing that this is a disheld wood motion. We believe that we would grant amnesty under the following conditions. First of all, the dictator resigns from power immediately, or Yep. Secondly, we agree to hand over military and democratic powers to a neutral UN-appointed government. We believe that there will be checks and balances will be in place. There will be regular reports to the UN. We believe that, for example, like Sheikh Hasina was replaced by Mohammed Yunus. We believe that it will be a very similar situation here. Note that there is quite an invested interest of this like governmental exchange going over well, right? Because a war is just simply not good for trade, not good for the economy, and not good for the international community as a whole. Thus, we believe that there will definitely be a lot of diplomatic oversight over this process. That will we only make this available in normal scenarios, right? I.e., before an intervention really takes place, or not allowing Assad, for example, to run away scot-free. But even though we have the burden to support amnesty, like in any condition, we believe that first of all, we are able to like guarantee that the new government is
Sure.
likely to succeed. First of all, empirically, people often dislike dictators who trample over the country and screw over the economy, right? And they often like torture and kill a bunch of like your friends and family. Therefore, they're very likely to support a new government when they appear. There is the popularity of Eunice being appointed. Secondly, a peaceful transfer of power often facilitated by amnesty, actually attract international support, right? When it comes to aid and diplomatic recognition. Because when a country transitions from dictatorship to a more democratic system, like the international community is often extremely eager to assist with reconstruction and development, like noting how many democratic and development aids that like IMF, multiple world banks, and also like the biggest developed nations of our world have on right now to help transition countries into democracies. Third of all, dictators often cede control of military power, and this allows better actors to take over and hence enforce the rule of law. We believe that the counterfactual, which is the one that the negative team will be supporting today, is that one of the dictators currently take over, or like another equally bad organization, which I'll be explaining later on why this is likely to be the only counterfactual. Okay, so now to my first argument about why this leads to more peaceful transitional power. The characterization here is, first of all, why are existing power transitions really bad, and what do they really look like? Firstly, most dictators, by the time they want to resign, are at a point where their empire has gone completely out of control, that people hate them. There are a lot of like social mobs. There are more and more enemies conspiring to kill them by the minute. It is a time of like quite extreme turmoil in the country. So therefore, the only ways that power is really transitioned from dictators in the status quo is through A, the violent murder of these dictators, being they run away, or C, they just literally don't see power right now, right? Thus, there are sudden absence in the first two options among a period of extreme unrest, or like even if they don't see power, it often leads to the violence. It often leads like the violence, the people who like oppose them to completely topple over. It leads to one of like essentially two outcomes, right? Firstly, the power vacuum, where different sides, once this top central figure is gone, there are a lot of different sides that fight to be the one in charge. This leads to decades of political instability, where essentially the common people, the peasants, are caught in the middle and like ruthlessly sacrificed by both sides, right? And very rarely does a functioning society really emerge from that. These nations often just like are immersed in this vacuum forever. Or B, the loyalists or oppositions take over, which is really cruel.
Sure.
Same regime, either in one case or the other. Yes, I'll take it.
In the case of Bangladesh, Sheikh Hasina was chased out of the country and a proper democratic system was formed. This is the most successful example of a transition from a dictatorship to a democracy, and it happened without amnesty. How does any of what you say and your criticisms apply here?
Yes, but I would like to note here that what you gave me is like one example amongst thousands of ones that I could potentially list if I really knew them, right? But like, however, secondly, I've given you mechanisms, right? Because this person is so hated, because there's so many oppositions and so many corners, from the political oppositions to the next biggest political party to like the common people on the ground. What most often occurs is that like there is just a huge political vacuum when it happens, right? For example, when the Venezuela, like Chavez, when he stepped down, it led to a completely large power vacuum that's still sweeping the country even now, right? Will be that because of these like mechanistical like characterization reasons, we believe that it's very, very much unlikely for like a sudden disappearance of like a top figure to like actually go well with the country. Okay, so why would dictators actually take these amnesty agreements, right? Firstly, like dictators often come under immense pressure from foreign powers, for example, economic sanctions, criminal in the economy, as well as domestic pressure, which means mass protests, etc., because of their massive unpopularity. They don't cede control right now because they'll get punished severely, they'll get locked out of jail, so therefore it's like a fight or die mindset, right? On our side, however, the number of bargaining chips increases advertently. For example, if we threaten invasion to force the dictator's hand rather than having to actually invade to get the dictator out of power, we that they're far more willing to negotiate under our side. Secondly, dictators are quite extremely selfish and only care for their personal benefits. They will kill many innocent people to create an empire absolute control, so they will also, in the same logic, leave behind and forsake a whole country to save their lives, right? Whether from being tried for war crimes, etc., etc. So if given the choice, they would choose to leave power peacefully rather than face the possibility of violent overthrow or execution, right? So like, why is this transition then likely to be peaceful on the outside? Note that startup already explains why this is likely successful. The reason power vacuums happen is because the subordinates compete for influence and power when there is a sudden loss of the leader. First of all, they're likely to arrange this with the UN and to move in before violence occurs. For example, subordinates cannot seize power and influence over the military when the deal between UN and the dictator allows a smooth transition, noting that we basically make them like give up all their power. And secondly, a calm transition of power and control of military, economic, and political institutions is what essentially happens under our model. So on to my second argument about how this gives more catharsis to victims of war crimes, right? Characterization. When a dictator is about to fall off from power, they destroy evidence to avoid persecutions or make it unnecessarily difficult. For example, killing all the witnesses, like burning all the physical evidence or paper recording documents. This means that they are far less likely to be convicted, even if everyone knows that they did something bad. And often war crimes are not just done by the dictator, but their military officers and subordinates. So the mechanism here is that dictators are more willing to expose evidence. Remind you, we categorize them as quite extremely selfish when a criminal prosecution isn't on the line because they have their access to most amount of information and they're willing to exchange information and evidence in return for more favorable amnesty conditions. So what this means, like, why is this so important, right? First of all, like, it's very hard to like arrest them, and it very rarely happens. It's more certain on our side that we get information. This means that victims are more likely to get like compensation, prosecutions are more likely to happen, and the people who really did harm to the nation actually get this harm. And because of this, I'm so proud
to do my speech. I'll first start off with some few rebuttals and then work on two pieces of framing, and then I'll work on my two arguments. Firstly, a principal argument how it's morally wrong, and secondly, in the effective like mechanism, it's like an ineffective mechanism to make dictators to step down. So firstly, onto some rebuttals. I think they gave a few main pushes. The first one is how about peace, and then gave like the impact on how it could like it could be detrimental to like the economy, and then how it could like attack people more. Okay, so firstly, is that future is not guaranteed on their side of the house. That people are in different places. So even if taking away the dictatorship, it does not mean that everything is going to end. It doesn't mean that the millions of thousands of people that follow the dictator will stop doing the same thing, right? Secondly, is that this is the only way to move on is to go through prosecution, because on proposition side, they're basically incentivizing them to continue it, as Dale will explain later. That we're basically telling them to, oh, it's fine because as long as you just surrender, everything is just gone, right? We'll just make it as if it never happened before. No, that's not right. Because these victims, already thousands of victims are being harmed, already millions of people have been being slaughtered. We can't just let this just let this like keep on going on, right? We can't let the murder just stay with everyone else. And for the rebuttal to the impacts about like attacking other people in the economy, firstly, that this is not the reason to be nice to them and letting them to step down, right, voluntarily. So this is basically incentivizing them to continue, whereas the long-term harm is even more significant because they would just try to attempt to say they will attempt like every single time, and then to try to say that, oh, this time you're not catching me, right? This time I can surrender again, and then they could just do it again and again. So secondly, is that we tell you that these governments that that because that they are keep on attacking and creating more chaos, that the governments that they have to that keep on getting hurt, that more people are being slaughtered. For example, Hitler almost ended Jews in like World War II, right? But because World War II made this end, then finally that these chaos everything ended, right? So And then another thing that they have talked about is about how like these killings and burning, right? However, we tell you that firstly that there's a long-term harm on their side, which is even more significant. That they have to which means that they have to because these dictators, they would have to like continue on doing it because as they feel like there's powerful and no one can stop them. Now, a few pieces of framing is that we're trying to this first one is like international. The second one is state, which we will care about both on our side of house. The second one is about dictators. What do they look like? They're desperate in position. They are because that they are being because they know that themselves are really powerful, and being a dictator is great for them. So thus that if they voluntarily step down, that this means that not all dictators do this. Which means that this happens for these dictators that are like over trolling. So, which leads my first argument is the principal argument about like this is morally wrong. Reason one is that dictators have committed severe crimes that they are deserved to get prosecuted. That most of these dictators they killed people and they destroyed people's lives. They're making millions of people suffer through this chaos. Thus, that we shouldn't allow these terrible things to happen anymore. That's that. We are basically forgetting everything that they did. We're making these victims to say that, oh, I forgive you because you basically surrendered. That's not how the world goes on, right? This is ridiculous. And imagine how you would feel if somebody murdered your family and then your entire family, and then they suddenly ran away, and then the police found them and said that if they surrendered, then they won't catch them. They wouldn't send them to jail or whatsoever. Then the murderer, they obviously surrendered, and then the police obviously let him go. Then how would you feel that a person has already killed your entire family, that they slaughtered your family? The most important thing is that they already kill people. That killing people is already not right, especially when you're murdering millions of people. And this is extremely unfair for these victims because of these victims they got slaughtered, right? No matter how much people they killed, after they step down, then everyone will just have to accept the fact that a murderer is existing beside them. A murderer is living inside their country. A murderer is living inside the community, and this is not like a normal murder. It's a dictator, which means that it's extremely powerful, and then it has like thousands of followers behind it. Then how about these victims' family? And they have to be so careful about about like every day of their life. They have to make sure that maybe like tomorrow I'm gonna get slaughtered or something. So argument two is that this is an ineffective mechanism to make dictators step down. Reason one is that dictators are often not aware of how desperate their position is. First mechanism is that dictators separated from like real world events. Second mechanism is that dictators are surrounded by people who agree with them because of these people that because that they really agree with these dictators because they think that they're really powerful. Another circumstance is that they're just way too afraid to say no to them, which brings the dictators more delusional. Third mechanism here is that they are hugely ego to themselves, that they can't imagine their power being taken away from them. That they are being a dictator means that they are prepared for a lot of things. They are prepared for war. That they are prepared for that they already have a lot of followers beside them. Which means that they already build a lot of confidence. Thus, stepping down is the last option for these dictators that they don't want to because they don't want to give their power away since it's such a good position for them, right? For example, Hitler during the city of Berlin in World War II, that Berlin already has been attacked by two sides. No, thank you. That he believed that Germany can still win with it because that he has so much power. That he is so confident that he already had like so many followers, and he was like so confident. But then because of this, this means that dictators, it's really hard for them to like stop, right? So the only way right now is to go through prosecution, right? Reason two is that even if that taking away the dictator cannot change the stance that they are in. That these dictators they have like these thousands of millions of followers, that they can't stop following just because like dictator stopped, right? If it doesn't bring down the dictator with force, then they can't like take down anyone else. It doesn't change anything. Reason three is that these dictators, they always have the escape card right now on their side of house. And they're incentivizing them to continue because as long as they surrender, it's completely fine. They don't get anything else. As long as they don't get punished, have to do how long do I have to continue in order for somebody to catch me? They would do this until that they really can't do it because someone is going to catch them. This is hurting, but this is in the long term. It's hurting more people in the future, and this is leading to more chaos, which we think that we both agree on both sides that we want more peace.
First, the question of whether or not dictators will actually take up the offer. because opposition, for how long they spend on it, can actually never win on this issue, right? Because the impact in this debate actually only occurs when the dictators take up the offer. Opposition gives you a series of mechanisms to suggest what dictators won't offer. Like, no active harm actually materializes on their side of the house. But we provide you a variety of reasons to suggest why dictators would take up the offer, right? Because in many instances, have to rule over a dirt poor country where there's a huge amount of instability, where assassinations, assassination Thomas Sankara being like executed by his best friend or whatever, is because they fear persecution, which is the issue that our side is able to exclusively solve, which means that, for example, when they're on the line, when they're on a balance between, for example, choosing to continue holding on to power or choose to surrender, like they're just far more likely to be pushed on and to be pushed over the fence and to choose to surrender, and therefore they're far more likely to take up the offer. I think the better part of their claims comes from their essentially explanation of how like it's going to result in a haphazard abuse of power. Like dictators would just have a safety net and continue abusing these individuals because they know they can opt out in the last second or whatever. Few responses that suggest why that's not true. First of all, dictators, especially those with a huge amounts of power, huge amounts of wealth, are naturally diverse. That means that these individuals are very unlikely to engage in such risky ways, that they're just far more likely to just surrender in the first instance instead of jumping back and forth, because they never know, for example, when they're going to result in a sudden loss of power and then they lose all bargaining chips. For example, in Syria, where Assad suddenly just lost control of Syria in a couple of weeks or whatever, right? But second of all, I just don't think the United Nations, whatever, is going to give these individuals conditions if they just keep being treacherous or keep going back and forth, right? United Nations is also not going to give favorable conditions to somebody whose country is already falling apart, whose dictatorship is already falling apart. I think also just the conditions change in instances where your conditions change depending on whether or not you're far more susceptible or you're far more favorable towards actually accepting the offer or whatever. Yes, I'll take a POI.
Is this amnesty being provided by some government within the country itself or by international governments? And if so, how is it regulated?
Obviously, these individuals or the UN, whatever, engages in diplomatic talks with these individuals, which allow for a peaceful transition of power. That allows, for example, UN peacekeepers to move in and ensure an interim government is something that is stable. As to for example, where they go to, I'm sure they can go to some random island and have a nice beach holiday there or whatever, right? But second issue on a question of morality, and that is what their first speaker really hinges their debate on, right? Few responses as to suggest why probably the issue of morality doesn't stand as firm as side opposition seems to claim, right? Because first of all, I know it's hypocritical and it's stuck up it's stuck up in moral and abstract considerations of whether it's fair when there's actual people on the ground who continue to suffer because that dictator is still on the ground, right? You're trading abstract moral considerations for the fact that hundreds of people continue to die and continue to suffer because that dictator is responsible for an artificial starvation, right? At least outside of the world, where it results in an interim government that is able to remedify that issue as much as possible. We value human life above abstract moral considerations, right? But second of all, even if you find these moral considerations important, we're able to far more fulfill that, right? Because they entirely miss the analysis of my first speaker when they say that dictators are able to provide evidence, are able to turn over evidence the UN, are able to dob their subordinates in whatever, which results in more people being held accountable, right? The status quo is one in which nobody is held accountable for I don't know, the army that's currently going on individuals, that enforces the people on the ground, the lieutenants and subordinates of these individuals accountable. That's probably far more important. But third of all, I think we just provide far better catharsis when compared to when we actually hold because people don't probably, because people don't hate Gaddafi in particular for the slaughter that they have done. They hate the people who actually fire the machine guns, the officers who actually order the massacres. At the point in which we're able to ensure that these people are held accountable, and provide far more important and far more meaningful catharsis to these individuals. That's why the morality argument we're able to win by such a significant amount. Then moving on to the next question of whether this is going to be a peaceful and stable transition of power, we just tell you that simply the individuals who are the ones that are being replaced are just simply UN, are simply an interim government being held by UN peacekeepers. I think the status quo is one in which when dictatorships fall, like different individuals compete for power. Like for example, as we've seen in Syria, where like Hussein, like Saddam Hussein fell from power or Gaddafi fell from power. There's a huge amount of terrorism. There's a huge amount of factionalism that results in huge civil war that led to a massive loss of lives. Right? Like structurally, we're able to ensure that like the individuals, the different like the 7 or 8 individuals who hold like different out in the military or in in economic institutions, whatever, don't fight amongst themselves, because we ensure that institutional power is held integral. We ensure that, for example, the UN is able to ensure that peaceful transition of power is able to have the next government is going to inherit a stable and peaceful government where like people don't break away from the government or whatever, right? But also we just tell you that maybe millions of people do follow that particular dictator because they have a cult of personality. That's far worse than opposition's fault, because when that dictator gets like unnaturally displaced, for example, through an airstrike, or for example, like through like an assassination, wherever, that leader now gets martyrized. Now these individuals are going to far more support that leader. And like individuals are going to, like individuals who claim to be that leader's like legitimate successor or whatever, is able to continue upholding that dictatorship. At a point in which that dictator willingly surrenders power, that signals to the millions of individuals who are going to be likely the military members on the ground who are committing these actions that they should probably just listen to that interim government. That results in a far more important transition to power. That's obviously really significant, because the fact that even if one dictator transitions to power in a peaceful manner, we avoid incidents such as the Libyan civil war, which caused hundreds of thousands of people to lose their lives. Even if we're able to cause one dictator to surrender to power peacefully, that will result in such a significant amount of benefit that you ought to weigh in this debate. Quickly moving on to victims, and I think we whipped this quite easily, especially considering that opposition makes very little regards to, like, you know, the benefits we're able to provide to the catharsis of these victims, right? Because I think the impact we provide is quite significant. Like the fact that a lot of subordinates who are actually responsible for these crimes are tried and arrested, the fact that there's more recognition, the fact that there's less, the fact that there's more evidence. So, like for example, like deniers of these crimes are like far less likely to gain ground. Or for example, like you're simply, the fact that you have more evidence means that victims have far more ground to claim compensation, which actually allows these individuals practical benefits to allow them to live on for the rest of their lives, to be provided with a catharsis that at least some part of their struggles is being recognized, and some part of their like rehabilitation and retribution is being done towards people who have caused so much pain to them. We provide such huge margins. Debate. The fact we save so much more lives, the fact that we provide catharsis to these victims. Proud to affirm. Thank you.
Government's entire case in this debate was based around the idea that A, these individuals are going to step down sooner, and B, that the transition in question would be better. If we are able to break these arguments, if not, even if we're able to wash these arguments, we end up winning simply on the principle. Let's then deal with this. This idea that they're going to step down sooner. First, this is premised on the idea that these individuals are even aware of the fact that that there is a threat of them being lost in power. I think that in the vast majority of cases, these dictators believe that they're going to be able to stay in power long. My Elo already gave. Second, I think that this characterization from government side is incredibly disgusting insofar as they say that being a dictator sucks. Actually, these poor dictators, they only stay in power because otherwise they'd be prosecuted. No, being a dictator is amazing. Even in a poor country, you are a billionaire essentially. You have complete power over everything, and you probably only got to that position because you ideologically believe yourself to be better than everybody else, and you feel deserving of that power. You are a wealthy person in an incredibly impoverished country. That gives you a lot of leverage. Fourthly, I think that overall, the opposite is going to happen to what government side necessarily talks about, insofar as these individuals are going to step down as late as possible. Given that in many instances that like they didn't really characterize how any of this is going to work, why is it that a dictator, knowing that this deal is in place, could just try to stay in power for as long as possible, and only at the end of it all, when they've already killed hundreds of protesters, when they finally realize that they will be overthrown, that they just like, okay, well, the deal exists, I'll take it, I'll go back. All the stuff about, oh, well, the UN won't like it or whatever. I really don't understand why dictators will be able to understand the nuances of the UN's diplomatic relations and how they're going to do all of this. I think on the comparative, you still get a slightly better world at the point where dictators know that the longer they stay, they're probably going to get even more, the people are probably going to get even more violent. Their charges against them are probably going to be even worse. If anything, people step down far more easily on our side at the point where they already step down in a significantly earlier on our side of the house. I think this argument about how you're going to destroy evidence is just so laughably stupid. Like, prosecution doesn't happen on government side anyway, and the vast majority of the crimes are still ordered by the person in question. You can't just say you have the principle of prosecuting people when you're not prosecuting the main person in question. These crimes are so unbelievably obvious. Most of the time, you don't need evidence to know that hundreds of people were shot on the street. With that, on to the third argument that we want to run about why dictatorial structures oftentimes remain in these countries unless these dictators are actively overthrown and this amnesty is not provided. First, the fact of the matter is the dictator is still out there. And the thing is, this argumentation about the martyr and everything else really doesn't work. Insofar as the cult of personality that exists is based on the idea of infallibility and usually falls at the point where this dictator is prosecuted and or killed. And secondly, most of the support does not come from the popular base. People generally don't like dictators. They come from agents within the military or within the political structure, which would like them to come back into power so that they can get some sort of selfish advantage. Note that this doesn't happen if the person is dead. Second, I think that you can't prosecute the rest of the structure if you allow for the person in charge to be let go. Why? Because of the legal precedence for prosecuting everyone is completely based upon the dictator's actions. Note that almost all of these actions can be said to be, oh, I was just following orders under coercion, and most legal systems have let them go. If you look at, for example, post-World War II Japan, after Hirohito was given immunity, almost none of the soldiers of the Japanese army were given any sort of redress for all of the terrible things they did in China, despite all of this. Why? Because they were just following orders and the entire structure wasn't prosecuted correctly. Finally, I think that there is a matter of the fate of the democratic system. They talk about a power transition, they talk about all of this. If you told a Bangladeshi today that the government in question was going to give amnesty to Hasina, who killed their entire family, I really don't think that these individuals would even buy into this democratic system. To hell with your democracy if you do not prosecute this person. If anything, within these types of situations, dictators arise at the point where people who are more violent, who are more radical, are going to say, we don't believe in the UN, we don't believe in this bullshit, we want her back, we want to kill her. If anything, that type of rhetoric works significantly better. Finally then, this idea that the power transition is going to be bad, why? There's a huge power vacuum. I really don't understand why you don't have a huge power vacuum on your side of the house at the point where you actively step down. Oh, the UN wants a democratic system. Why doesn't the UN want a democratic system on our side of the house? The UN wants a democratic system because they want stability within a region and a rules-based world order. Whether or not these individuals, were violently overthrown or they step down, after they step down or are overthrown, the UN still has the exact same incentives. And the vast majority of situations, the power vacuum that you talk about doesn't exist because in a huge majority of these countries, things like pro-democracy movements have existed and festered, and resistance movements have been there to take power. This happened in Bangladesh. This happened even in Syria, where there wasn't a precedence for a democratic system for 70 years, and yet we still have a peaceful interim government in a situation where they were overthrown. It's unclear why any of this worked. Sure.
You say that dictators step down sooner without an amnesty safety net. Doesn't that contradict your characterization that dictators are confident and don't know how bad political instability is in their country?
I was being charitable to your case that given I buy your mechanism and given I buy all of this, that in most situations, because of the degree of difference in terms of the in terms of how bad the punishment is now versus then, that they are likely to do it earlier insofar as they can get less punishment. This is completely based on your best case scenario, by the way. Finally, then, I think one thing I really need to address is why is it that the principle matters so much? Government just says these are abstract considerations that do not matter at all, completely ignoring the fact that there is a huge amount of catharsis from this and that people on the ground actually value it. I think that opposition stands for something that's very simple. Murderers ought to be brought to justice and that the victims ought to feel catharsis. To see these individuals who are more abhorrent than any criminal, than any murderer, than any rapist, to be set free is not something that we as the people of that country, and especially as the UN as an external body, cannot just say. The external body of the UN cannot go tell a people who have suffered so much and tell them that, oh, we're just going to take him, we're going to give them immunity, you can't hurt him. Why? It's all for your own good. I don't care about the utility, that doesn't matter. And I really want to quote something from my own protests. It was, Amar bhaire firat dao hasina hasina. It roughly translates to give me back my brother, Hasina Hasina. After thousands of my own classmates were murdered on the streets and their heads bashed in. At that point, I really don't care. Why? Because you can never get those people back. That violence, those murders, those lives can never be redressed, no matter the utility. The lives lost can never truly be returned. In that way, the only way we can be truly principled to have any sort of morality in this debate is to bring down through violent force to execute and prosecute those who have destroyed the lives of millions. So proud.
The first question I'm going to answer in my speech is what the counterfactual looks like and what occurs in the absence of our model, because we don't think it is a peaceful transition of power in many instances. The types of ways dictators fall now are incredibly violent, and they lead to additional cycles of violence which entrench countries in positions where they are continually oppressed. Let's look at what ends up happening. The first possibility is that the dictator just dies of old age. What ends up happening in the majority of these instances is that another dictator, probably like one of this person's cronies, ends up replacing him. This is what happened with, for example, Hugo Chavez getting replaced by Nicolas Maduro in, for example, Venezuela. The second thing that occurs is that there is an assassination attempt, which often topples a dictator. We think in these instances, again, there are replacement mechanisms that exist for dictators to replace the individuals, replace themselves with another person who is able to get them power. The third thing that might occur is that there is just a full-on intervention. The problem with existing interventions is that when, for example, the US invades unilaterally, there is no succession plan. So the point in which, like, even if you do succeed in toppling the dictator, what ends up occurring is that another dictator comes out, there is a counterinsurgency movement against the US, and often this means that even in instances such as in Afghanistan, the US has to withdraw many years later. What ends up occurring on our side? Our model was incredibly clear. We would offer individuals amnesty and use this as a way to negotiate and bargain. What is the response that they give to this? The first thing that they say is that because dictators are overconfident, this means that they are no longer likely to actually accept this deal. Clearly, the principled harms that they talk about only manifest when the deal is accepted, so that is also slightly self-mitigatory. But also just note in many instances that these powers are scared of the US, they are scared of international powers in many instances. The example of like Hitler doesn't really apply in the instance because there is no dictator in the world right now that is as powerful as Hitler, for example, was. The United States has the largest military power in the world, is massive economic leverage, it is able to impose sanctions. What this means is that in many instances, dictators aren't stupid. They know that they are likely to lose. The problem in the status quo is that they are in an option of either fighting to the death or like getting like certainty of a life in jail. Clearly, amnesty is an incredibly good way out of that, right? The next thing that they say is that maybe they'll just continue fighting. The next thing that they say is that even if, for example, dictators cede power, there will be a really messy and bad transition. The first thing that we would note is that toppling dictators is an incredibly popular thing. The response to this is that because they're not getting prosecuted, potentially there would be massive uprising and lots of uproar. This isn't necessarily the case. Dictators don't get prosecuted right now. When they get toppled over, for example, like the Assad regime getting overthrown, it's still massively popular, even if there is, for example, even if they're not directly toppled over. But secondly, we would say existing transitions are already incredibly poor. Sure, I'll take that point.
Judge, there is Germany our case. We said that we want to have amnesty, right? We're giving them the exit card. The dictators, they will continue the crime at last minute. We're not saying that we're just like letting them go, right?
Oh yeah, so I'll respond to that in my second clash later on. But basically, what I would like to say is just like, no, this like right now they do not choose to cede power. On our side, they do not choose to continue engaging in crimes right now. Because I think what we clearly stated in our model to little to no response is that what occurs on our side is that we give them, for example, an offer of amnesty, and then we attach that with some strings. For example, countries would like use bargaining power, we would threaten to impose sanctions, threaten to invade. If, for example, this offer was not accepted and an actual invasion had to be conducted, then that offer is already taken away. The way in which this model works is that it plays on the fears of dictators. On their side, once a dictator, for example, ends up getting over, once the dictator ends up, for example, rejecting the offer and the invasion is in place, we don't think we have the obligation to necessarily give them that type of amnesty deal anyway. But furthermore, we think because dictators don't want to fight a massive bloody war where they know they will probably end up losing, what ends up, or like, for example, they end up getting prosecuted, they are more likely to take the rational option. They are more likely to take the option of amnesty. This prevents an entire war from occurring. That is a massive practical benefit. But furthermore, in many instances, because of the nature of the way that the UN is able to intervene in our instance, because we are, for example, attaching amnesty to a series of negotiations where the UN can ensure that the democratic government is a replacement, as opposed to, for example, another dictator being in place, this is another massive benefit that SYED negative fails to respond to. But furthermore, in the instance where they don't take this deal, this is literally just the status quo. So it is unclear what the necessary harm is there under this clash. What we are able to show is that the transitions of power are far more smooth on our side. We give several reasons at first speaker, which get no response. Firstly, often it is popular. Secondly, we think that countries are likely to have incentives to provide aid to this country. They have incentives to ensure that the country actually succeeds in rebuilding. And thirdly, we think part of the conditions attached to amnesty is that dictators can cede control of military power. When you give a new democratic government military power, it makes it far harder for insurgency movements to come up. That is a big practical win. Second clash I'm going to deal with is the catharsis to victims. Their first argument is to say that it is morally wrong to not prosecute. That is uncomparative because in the status quo, prosecutions rarely exist ever. Police barely ever catch dictators because dictators just end up running away to, for example, Assad goes to Russia. Or, for example, it is the bar for evidence is actually quite high. In many instances, they destroy evidence. The way that our first speaker provides too little to no response is just to say that on our side, we are likely to disincentivize action. We are likely to disincentivize dictators from just absolutely destroying evidence. Why is that a bigger harm then than what SYED negative is able to tell us? That is firstly because of certainty, because there is a very low certainty that you get any level of prosecution, any level of catharsis on their side, whereas on our side, we can guarantee at least these people's stories are told. Dictators no longer go around slaughtering victims, trying to hide evidence and then shutting victims out. This is a massive impact, right? In instances where they didn't get prosecuted ever, it was at least good that these stories were told. People knew about what happened. But furthermore, they say that it incentivizes dictators to continue engaging in bad actions. The reason why this doesn't occur is, again, because of the way our model is set up, right? Because, for example, if you don't accept the deal, then you're going to eventually get toppled in power anyways. Finally, they say that even if, for example, the prosecutions are successful, it is still worth pursuing the prosecution for the sake of it. The problem is, if you intend on continuing the prosecution process, this also leads to massive practical harms where, for example, the dictator continues murdering civilians. Allowing that to continue is also a massive principal harm that you should not accept. This was better for victims. It did not undermine catharsis, but furthermore, it made transitions of power peaceful.
I want to point out that government has totally misunderstood our points, right? They try to say that we are proving that these dictators they're likely to reject resigning, right? But that's totally not our point. We're saying that since they know that if they resign, they won't be prosecuted, so they're likely to continue doing crimes until the last minute when they think that they're going to be killed, right? So what we mean is that they're not likely to actually to stop doing the bad things earlier, but what this kind of policy is doing is that it is incentivizing the dictators to resign at the last minute when everything cannot be changed. And I just wanted to make it clearer, okay? And also, and now I'll start doing rebuttals. So firstly, the government side, they try to say that they're going to be less victims, right? They also say that it will enhance peace. However, they have clearly ignored our point of the followers in the structure of the government, the previous government, is still exists, right? This is because since the society isn't able to prosecute the dictator, it is totally impossible. It's nearly impossible to prosecute his followers, right? And also this structure still exists after this kind of government, right? And as a result, we believe that this society isn't actually able to be changed. And also they ignored our point about how people they will lose their trust of the government if they do not prosecute the dictator, right? Because most of the citizens, they know that this dictator, he is a bad guy, right? And they want the dictator to be prosecuted. However, the government doesn't ask you to prosecute the dictator. What this will happen is that the citizens will think that the dictator he's just the same as the new government, right? And as we have already pointed out in our previous speeches, this will mean that it will actually harm the whole democracy system and actually create more chaos. And this means that like the government is not likely to be able to be trusted by the citizens anymore, and they will actually cause more people deaths because of chaos, right? And also moving on, so the government side, they also talk about that like they're to talk about that like dictators are likely to accept offer. They say that like they will be able to have a peaceful shift, and they have United Nations. They will interfere in this, right? They try to like to persuade us that like United States, United Nations, when they want to like interfere into a better democratic world, this will be like better for the society, right? But we believe that this is totally incorrect. This is because what actually matters is not what UN thoughts, right? What matters, as we have already repeated a lot of times, are the citizens, right? And as well, we believe that it is morally incorrect to let this kind of like criminal to be to escape from law and not being prosecuted after killing so many people, after doing so many harmful things, right? And as a result, we believe that this is the reason why we win this principle argument, and this is the reason why we believe that this is totally inappropriate for the government to do this kind of policy, because it will actually make citizens lose their trust of this. And now moving on to my clash analysis. So firstly, I believe that the first clash in this debate is about effectiveness. So whether this kind of policy can actually make the dictator do less like crimes, right? We believe that firstly, we give reasons why this is ineffective, because like dictators, they are not aware of the desperate conditions until they're going to die. They're going to like resign at the last minute when they have already done a lot of crimes, right? However, in our counterfactual, what will happen is the dictator, he knows that like he is going to die if he does like more crimes, right? So he's likely to like resign earlier to avoid these kind of like crimes, and or else like if he still doesn't actually isn't still aware, then we have other kind of factuals which will force him to step out, right? Step down. And as a result, this is the reason why we believe that we have won this clash, because on the other side, for the government side, they gave just a little bit of rebuttal of this. They try to say that like they try to say that the new transition will be a peaceful thing, because like UN will interfere, and also it will actually increase like bargaining or something like that. But they have totally ignored our point of how like there will still be systems and structures left by the previous like dictator, right? And now before I move on to the second clash, I will accept it if you like.
Yep, thanks. If Saddam Hussein surrendered years earlier, would have stopped tens of thousands of Kurdish people being slaughtered. Is that a price you're willing to pay for accountability?
Well, we believe that in our world, like this is like it is actually hard to like avoid, because like it is crucial to to create a far better government, right? Because if you just let him like go and just doesn't let him like to be prosecuted, what means is that like firstly, it's that most of the dictators in the world, they will think that like they're able to just get out of this kind of mess, and also they think that this. And also for most of the citizens, they think that this kind of justice cannot be brought to them, right? So they will lose trust for the government. And now I will move on to the second clash. And the second clash is about citizen safety, right? So we believe that in like the government's role, if the people they lose their trust of the government, what they will do is that like democracy society will be harmed, right? It will create a lot of chaos, because people will come protest, and also there will be a lot of like conflicts between people, and that will actually create like more people's death, and also it's way harder to create a new government after this mess, right? And as a result, we believe that we have won these two clashes. And also move on to the world comparison. So in our world, when the dictator does a lot of crimes, we can principally prosecute him and bring justice to the citizens, right? We'll be able to have a new and better government quickly built because of citizen trust. However, on the other side, when citizens they lose their trust because the government because the criminal, the dictator isn't prosecuted, what this will happen is that there will be chaos and more people will die of this. And as a result, we believe that we want this fate. Thank you.
I find government's case in this debate not only wrong, but disgusting. Their blatant disregard for the interests of these people, of the people of these countries, to determine their own destiny, to be able to prosecute their own leaders, be able to hold them accountable. Their characterization of dictators as these benevolent individuals who do no harm, who are only kept in power by the threat of prosecution. Their case does not stand and cannot stand in any public debate around the world. If this is to pass, this is a world that we would not want to live in. Broadly, two clashes here. First, on the transition of power, and second, and more importantly, on the principle which they were unable to engage with. First then, on the transition of power, I think we proved to you something very clearly, which is that dictators will want to stay in power for as long as possible, even if you give them amnesty. Why? Because assuming that these individuals, want to stay in power insofar as being a dictator is pretty great. I don't buy your characterization that, these poor dictators, my life is so bad as a dictator of North Korea. I really think that in the vast majority of instances, when you have a get out of jail free card, you're probably going to get a chance your luck in trying to stay in power for as long as possible. I don't think the threat of assassination is really that big to be able to justify something like this. And in either situation, we're happy to take the counterfactual. Second, I think we proved to you that this really only happens in situations where dictators absolutely, for sure, know that they're going to be overthrown. The counterfactual isn't dictators that are going to continue to stay in power for 20 more years. There are people who are going to be overthrown in a couple of months. This example about Saddam Hussein doesn't work because Saddam Hussein at the time was at the height of his power, but the vast majority of crimes of dictators happen when they have the power to do them and get away with it. I don't think it would have. I don't think this really. I think this is more so a debate that happens right before Saddam Hussein was captured by the U.S. military, at which point, to hell with the guy. I think that generally speaking, war and overthrowing is just generally not that bad. Most of the time, okay, a couple hundred people are killed, but it's often nothing compared to what the dictators had done previously. And if anything, we're perfectly fine to deal with that because the principle is generally more important. If you ask Soviet soldiers or the Jews in the camps of the Holocaust who defected to the Soviet army and who marched on Berlin, even when they knew that it was an option to just stop at German borders, to not destroy the Reich, they still pushed through and they still threw themselves at the enemy and died in the millions even after the war was essentially won and they could have gone home. Why? Why is it that the members of the Warsaw Ghetto, knowing that perhaps there was no utility to rising up and to speak out against the Reich, to kill themselves on the altar of their identity was so important to them? Because people choose to do so. Because people believe in what they want to believe in their identity, that these people must be brought to justice no matter what. The utility does not matter even if we win it. And finally, I think their argumentation about the multiple mechanisms of democratic transition nonsense, this doesn't stand. Mostly because it's completely symmetric. They gave us a bunch of mechanisms for why the democratic transition will happen. The UN exists, this exists. Oh, you have all of these separate mechanisms. Why is that mechanism not a thing when these individuals are overthrown? The UN exists on either side of the house. And if anything, we argue to you that the peaceful transition was arguably worse, because at least on a violent overthrow, most of the time, the entirety of the old structure is completely obliterated. Right now in Bangladesh, you can't find a single Awami League political party like headquarters or anything. Why? Because we burnt all of them down because the old structure was violently overthrown by its populace, while that doesn't really happen when you have a peaceful transition. Finally then, on the principle, their literal only response to this was that, people don't get prosecuted and run away, like Assad ran away, Hasina ran away. I think that it is very different for let's say, a murderer to run away from a country and not get prosecuted versus them being actively pardoned and given immunity by a government and thereby legitimizing their crimes. That is not the same thing. There were millions of people who cheered in the streets of Dhaka when Hasina fled, not because of some just plain utility, but more so because the dictator that they had hated had been thrown out of their country. If she was given that type of legitimacy, if she was allowed to stay as a completely normal member of society within this country, if anything, told by a foreigner that they are perfectly fine, that they're perfectly safe, that they're perfectly immune, and you can't do anything about it. We're doing it for your own good. I really don't think that the people of this country would accept it. So proud to
the point at which opposition falls in this debate is when they rely too much on real life, on like their personal examples, rather than actual mechanisms on what the majority of cases look like. So two main things I've identified. Firstly, the principal clash of morality and justice, and the practical clash of which side actually benefits the country more. I'll now go through the counterfactual, and by going through the framework, I'll attempt to weigh the practical clash over the principle. The opposition has not exactly rebutted against my first speaker when she categorized and gave structural reasons about why the likely counterfactual is political instability, nor have they given a well-mechanized alternative rather than assertions and scattered examples throughout this debate. Thus, as it is the only framework that exists in today's debate, we can assume that most dictators would have to die in order to get overthrown, which means that they obviously can't attend trial and get justice for the rest of the nation, or their loyalists most often take over, right? Because they still remain within the military and political system, as the second negative speaker himself says, which means the same regime will just occur again throughout history. They are not persecuted, the subordinates now can't be touched as they are not the dictators, therefore their principle is contingent completely on practical outcomes of the country actually being peaceful and having enough evidence in the aftermath to actually trial these subordinates, to get that kind of catharsis, to get that justice in the end. Therefore, we weigh the principle clash over the practical clash over principle because it is the precondition. Okay. So I'll separate the practical clash into a few main questions. Firstly, will dictators actually take up the offer? They said a few things. Well, you will want to step down as late as possible because you're a billionaire, wealthy person in a poor country, or they're surrounded by people who agree with them. They don't know the situation. Firstly, structural reason that we have given you. UN has master negotiators who often negotiate with terrorist organization pirates where hundreds of hostages' lives are on the line. So my third speaker has told you, right? These negotiators are often the one who discuss the amnesty option with the dictator before these interventions occur. And for example, they'll use manipulation, bring up statistic, opposition plans. They're extremely professionally trained and have researched every part of this dictator site, for example, right? And because they know US is powerful, they're very, very likely to secede power because of these kind of mass negotiated tactics, right? Secondly, if you don't take this, we are giving you a categorization of dictators, right? They're extremely selfish and care only for their benefits. So if given the choice, they'll rather leave power peacefully rather than face the possibility of literally being killed and all the power being taken away from them and their wealth as well. B, if we take opposition's categorization that they will step down as late as possible because they love power, this is equivalent on either sides of the house, right? Because one, why would they step down early on opposition when most dictators power when they are dead, right, as we've established down the line? And secondly, at least on our side, even our worst case scenario, yes, they'll wait as late as possible. We'll still get a few years between when the manipulation takes place and also their death to prevent millions of deaths, which doesn't happen under opposition because relinquishing control only happens at death. There have been many new arguments at reply, and I hope you do not take this into account. Second question, will this actually lead to a peaceful and successful overthrow? We believe that on our side, firstly, dictators step down earlier, right? Secondly, UN will help not now that all economic military power is ceded to the UN and they have a vested control interest in having this being successful. And of all, there are funds for emerging democracies which only really happen under our case, not under theirs, when there's massive political instability and power vacuums going on. Okay, third question of catharsis. Will this actually lead to a better future for the victims? They said that you can get catharsis from killing the dictator, from trialing them, and most subordinates get immunity because they were following orders. First, take note about how they can't really persecute dictators when they're dead, right? And let's talk about uniqueness. On both sides of the house, your brother's classmates can't really come back from the dead. This is the same on both sides. You cannot claim anything from this statement. However, it is only on our side where we uniquely give dictators the incentive to not destroy evidence because it will be not used against them in law. Therefore, on our side, there's a higher likelihood of having enough evidence remaining to not only implicate, but completely destroy the case of these subordinates, right? And also on our side, victims have a better case when it comes to claiming reparations. They're now able to talk about the trauma without persecutions from a new dictatorship to heal and move on. And the country has no political opposition when it comes to embracing memorials, and in the long term, more victims are saved because they surrendered earlier. It's because we benefit victims so much more that I'm so proud to affirm. Thank you.